The 2025 DD Council Training and Technical Assistance Institute was planned by a group of your peers. And one of these that I'd like to introduce to you is Katie Arbaugh. Katie is the Program Operations Coordinator for the West Virginia Developmental Disabilities Council. Before her 3 years with the council, she worked as a direct support professional, a special education teacher, an early interventionist, and she's a graduate of Partners in Policymaking. Katie?
All right, thank you so much, Amy, for the introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this session titled Positive Practices When Using Social Media. In this session, we will explore common social media platforms being used and strategies on when to adopt them, as well as managing negative content that might surface. We will also explore the benefits of having a social media policy and/or guidelines for council members and staff. I'd like to introduce our speakers today. Michael Wynn is the president and CEO of RBOA, a Tallahassee-based digital marketing agency with 38 years of experience. He oversees digital media campaigns, branding, and WordPress web development for over 225 clients, ensuring the use of the latest technologies and SEO strategies. Previously, Michael led the Catalyst Consultant Group. He has consulted for major brands including Acura, Honda, and General Motors, as well as nonprofits like United Way and the American Cancer Society. An active member and past president of AAF Tallahassee, Michael has over 25 years of experience in marketing, business development, and public relations. His daily digital marketing podcast ranks in Spotify's top 5 in the category. Jolene Sharp is also with us today. She is the Chief Strategy Officer for the Tennessee Council on Developmental Disabilities, where she oversees leadership development, public policy, and communications work. Jolene's professional background is in communications with a decade of prior experience in the healthcare sector. So we welcome them today. And Michael, I'm going to turn it over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Katie. And thank you, Amy and Cheryl, for the invite to be able to share with the councils on this really important topic of social media. You know, when I joined RBOA 14 years ago and was introduced to the Florida Developmental Disabilities Council as one of our clients for nearly 2 decades, I had a crash course in what's important to this community and what are some of the things that keep an executive director up at night, and how do we navigate through changes in society and the way that society consumes content. And so obviously through the emergence of social media, some of the things that we're going to talk about, I want to make sure that we have a good foundational understanding. But I'm also going to talk about some of the shifts that we've seen really in the last 24 months. And we're going to get into that once we break down some of the platforms and some of the content that is changing the way we approach from a messaging standpoint and a policy standpoint on how to guide a conversation. I mean, social media was really about being invited to the party, the online party. It wasn't a networking or a professional party where everybody wore their suit and showed up for, you know, a workshop. It wasn't like that. It was really more, we were sharing, you know, sandwiches and recipes and things of that nature. But it's become a way for society to consume content, whether it's news or updates, and so many different things. So we're going to explore the social media platforms, think about strategic adoption when new ones evolve, and then how in the world are we going to address positive or negative comments when those happen, and how to do it effectively. And then, of course, why is it important to have a policy, have a roadmap, a guideline internally for how and when and where and why and who and what is going to handle social media, as well as the disclaimers that you should have. And the last point we will definitely want to spend some time on is identifying the creative building blocks for success with social media. So let's dig in and get started. Why does social media really matter for DD councils? Well, if you haven't figured it out yet, being able to increase awareness and really amplify your message and advocacy efforts has to be number one. Followed by that is it allows you to build trust through transparency and ongoing communication with content that you're publishing on the platform. And please don't forget this. If you don't lead the narrative, someone else is already doing it. And that's probably one of the biggest advantages that I think nonprofits or DD councils face is that there are people talking about your council, they're talking about what's happening in the IDD community in your state, and why not be the leader in that conversation? And then lastly, being able to highlight impact by sharing real stories, real programs, and achievements that your council has done, whether it's last week or last year, or things that you hope to achieve in the year to come. And I think the other thing that we've learned, it's been an incredible opportunity for RDOA to work with FDDC for now over 20 years, but to really understand that social media is helping councils build momentum around the priorities outlined in their 5-year plan. It's and I see this a lot with other nonprofits or councils where you've got this 5-year plan, but there's not been a coordinated effort to sync up. How do we impress the impact of access to service? How do we really illustrate or demonstrate home and community-based systems? How do we really tell the story of aging caregivers or self-advocacy leadership? So having these buckets that are a part of the storytelling that you're doing, that's really important. You can't have the marketing or PR department off on a silo doing whatever if it's not tied to that 5-year plan. And it's easy to do if you take the time and thoughtfully plan it out. And so let's talk about some of the platforms. There are so many social media platforms. Some have come, some have gone, some are here to stay, some are changing. So obviously, starting off number one with the Meta platform with Facebook and Instagram, it is interesting, and we'll talk about the assets in a minute, but with Facebook, LinkedIn, even X and YouTube, the ability to click on a link makes something unique about that platform. Whereas Instagram, you can go through the link in bio, but that's a little cumbersome for some users. But we just wanted to highlight really quickly being able to leverage the events capabilities and those types of suggestions from the platform to your local community or statewide community through Facebook is a great way to increase engagement and get the word out. And no doubt, over the last 4 to 5 years, the Reels or the vertical video format has really, really taken off like wildfire. And I mean, and even look at what TikTok has done. And so understanding how people are consuming content by the platform will dictate how you create your content. Because if you don't create the content in a palatable format, it's like showing up to an Italian dinner party, with something not Italian, right? Like, I don't know, Greek salad or something that's not appropriate for the party, right? You show up with tacos. and so you want to make sure that you are presenting your content in the right way. So let's dig into that link economy for storytelling. What are we talking about? We're talking about the ability to have a link in your content when it's posted, whether it's in the body or whether it's a button that's been added by the platform. But understanding that should be part of your content creation strategy to know that, hey, will people have the opportunity to click a button and go to a website or an article or something like that? That's important to understand as you're thinking about your content strategy. And again, of course, video as storytelling is so compelling. The example that we have on screen here of a caregiver in Alachua County here in Florida, we did an entire Our Work Matters campaign, and wow, just incredible how far the reach. And that's something that video allows more than any other type of content. So being able to use whether it's short form or long form videos to share experience is really important. And we'll dive more into YouTube in just a few minutes. Another thing that's happening, especially on the Facebook platform, is the different capabilities of building community and having that engagement, that back and forth, whether it's commenting or sharing or liking, things of that nature, gives councils the opportunity to really provide information in real time, as well as to provide an example of how a council can be a trusted source and can demonstrate impact through that. And so while we've got these little green and red X's, it doesn't mean like one's good or one bad. It's just like understand that this is a strength and understand that this is a difference, right? And so for Facebook, understanding that broad reach around key audiences, whether it's caregivers or families, is a strength. But understand what comes with that is this is an open channel. This is going to allow and or invite comments that require active moderation, right? So as we continue over to Instagram, we understand that it is a great platform for storytelling through visuals, whether it's video or whether it is, a graphic that you've created. Just understand that clickable link, that's the part that's tricky. You can't do that on Instagram, but there is the link in bio. You could use platforms like Linktree where you can create the link and you can do all kinds of things from there. So it is a workaround. But just understand that's what the platform was designed to do. And so again, it's building awareness by showing, not just telling what your council does. So again, I think, we've seen great success with the Instagram platform. When we transition over to LinkedIn, I think everybody needs to make sure that they understand what happens from a mental standpoint. We put a different mindset on. Right? If I go and I pull up my phone and I click on that LinkedIn icon, my brain is I'm in a different place mentally than if I click on the Facebook icon. Why is that? Because we understand that LinkedIn is about thought leadership, or we understand that it's about career opportunities. It's a different kind of environment. It's a different kind of gathering. And so keeping that in mind and knowing what the council what kind of content you might share there, of course, sharing reports or impact or council updates or policy related insights. These types of things allow you to build credibility with your agencies or policymakers or even potential partners. And of course, identifying yourself as a thought leader in the IDD community is so important, as well as what seems like an uphill battle when it comes to identifying career opportunities for those, whether you're in the caregiver or case manager, any relevant segment of our communities that helps this community move forward to become healthy and independent. YouTube, boy, this is one that is really, I think, underutilized by a lot of nonprofits, and councils are the same way. What is the biggest advantage of YouTube? Many people don't realize that YouTube is second most searched platform on the internet, next to its text-based search partner, just going to google.com and typing in whatever your phrase is. But YouTube is number 2. And why is that? Because it's ideal for visual storytelling of impact. And it also provides you with access to global reach, right? You're not segmented to just Florida or just Texas or New Hampshire, whatever, Maine, Chicago, wherever you are, Illinois. Um, and then the ability to show up in suggested videos, as well as the option to click the share button very easily and share to all kind of different platforms, or email it, or to your social network. I mean, text it to someone. The ability to easily share videos is huge. It really is. But I can't think of a more important reason than when you are sitting there and listening to someone's story about how their caregiver or how their case manager helped them find the resources that they needed. you know that is really incredible. You see, so there's so many podcasts that are also published on YouTube, or and gathering your content together in a playlist is also another great way to optimize the platform, so you can kind of put in these buckets these ideas or themes that are a part of your content. Not to mention the short vertical format videos is really starting to take off like wildfire, in large part to do with the success of TikTok. But yet, obviously, with the controversy of whether or not it's going to be banned or not, YouTube is a great place to store that video, vertical video content. And don't forget, in YouTube, the description area under the video is also, did you know you can put a link in there? And that's a great way to link to resources on your website, which is fantastic for search engine optimization. Another little secret that I often hear people surprised by is, I didn't realize that social media activity has an impact on how high my website is ranked. Why is that? Well, because humans are creating that activity on social media. And if the humans are saying that this content is good because they're liking and they're sharing, well, the search engines have a way to measure that signal. And so if you've got one organization that has zero social media presence, and you have another one that's brand new who is actively participating across multiple platforms, they could rank higher even though they may only been organized for 2, 3, 4 years. And of course, we know that it's very important to the councils to make sure that when people are trying to find resources that are available, whether it's through the programs or initiatives that the council is promoting and or organizing or directing, has oversight to, however you want to frame that, that's really important. So when is it time to adopt a new platform? The one thing that I've learned in this game, it is an attention game. We are really platform agnostic, because at the end of the day, where can we get the most eyeballs, period? That's really what it's about. And we have seen such a huge shift in that, and I'm going to talk about that in a minute, why followers aren't exactly the holy grail anymore. We'll talk about that in a minute. But first of all, you just need to understand, okay, if we're gonna look at a new platform, what is the content preferred format? Is it video? Is it long form, short form? Is it square? Is it rectangle? What is the creative? And then identifying, what is our audience? Are they here? What are they doing? What are they following? What are they liking? So having a purpose, identifying who you're trying to reach and why, and then matching the platform strengths with your content type, video, links, or visuals, and then having a strategy, right? The strategy is not throw the noodles on the wall and see what sticks. That's not a strategy. That's the hope and pray and spray that usually results in poor performance and reach. And you know what? We don't have all day. The building is on fire. as Mary said in her earlier talk, for those of you who went to Mary Lazar's talk last week, yeah, we need to act like the building is on fire. So how do we do this? Well, I started by saying you should create buckets around your 5-year plan and understand, okay, literally we should be posting once a day, Monday through Friday at the minimum. Really? Yes, really. Why? Because organically, if I post at 9 o'clock in the morning on Facebook, by 9:27, that post is so far down the feed, it is gone unless I put any money behind it. No one will ever see it. And so, additionally, we're going to talk about one of the big shifts, but that's just one piece. The next thing that we want to talk about is, okay, that's one content bucket, 5-year plan. And then what about your core messaging themes? What is it that your council is trying to really, have this narrative arch or arc, if you will? Maybe it is about health and independence as an overall theme, right? Just the broad theme. And so right there, if you've got a 5-year plan and you got 4 buckets and you got, 2 themes, that's 7 pieces of content. And then if you were to spread that out over 4 weeks, well, then you just need a couple of pieces in each bucket to be able to tell that story in an effective and strategic way. And that still gives you an allotment for the things that you didn't plan for. The building shut down, whatever, right? National disasters, things of that nature. Number 2, once you've thought about your messaging and your content strategy, is to define what does a successful outcome look like. Is it number of comments? Is it number of shares? Is it impressions? What are the measurables? And we'll get into those in a minute. And then you've got to use the scheduling tools that are out there. We cannot be sitting there waiting for 9 o'clock to come and then hit the publish button, because that is not time effective. And then lastly, really consider staff capacity and resource. Who can manage this consistently? Do you have a schedule where people are checking, where team members are checking in to look at the comments and review that active engagement on these platforms? Just remember that these programs and these platforms only work if your content is compelling enough for someone to take action, whatever that action might be. Make a call, click a link, share a resource, etc. All right, so let's dig into this. How are we going to deal with negative content? First of all, we need to understand what is happening. Is where do we draw the line? I mean, obviously, hurtful or harmful comment, boom, instant ban. But do we understand the difference in shifts of positive versus negative comments? And then how do we handle that? Because here's what you got to understand. Your response to comments tells a lot about your organization, whether you like it or not, or whether you acknowledge it or not. So if you just sit there and let comments go and you don't say anything, well, it's like no one's home. And what are you communicating? You don't care. We also understand that being able to differentiate that type of content, being able to respond with clarity and respect. And just know that the last thing you want to try to do on social media is prove your point. You're not going to get anywhere with that. If you get in a discussion like that, encourage them to take it offline. Right? And if we dig in a little bit more, really understanding what are the differences. I mean, there's a difference between someone that's just truly incorrect or has misleading claims, and then there's the trolls that are just trying to, create drama, or they disagree with your statement, or they're just completely irrelevant. But at the end of the day, when you're correcting misinformation, You want to inform them without trying to get in that debate to try to prove your point. Now, not every comment deserves a response. Well, what does that mean, Michael? You said you can't let it go. Well, just hit the like button. Probably the most neutral thing you can do, but it is a form of acknowledgement. All right, how do we de-escalate and create that brand responsibility? First of all, stay calm and professional and be brief. Acknowledge those concerns without getting into an argument. When appropriate, take that discussion offline. Be careful to understand what legal risks there might be. Being able to reduce reputational harm for unaddressed comments. And again, like I said, many people are watching to see how the council responds, and your tone has the opportunity to create that trust. So draw that line in the sand. If it's discrimination, hate speech, or threats, boom, hit the ban button, right? And on the Facebook platform, it's super easy. You can delete, you can hide. You've got those abilities to do that for that content, and it's really important. For those of you who want a great example of social media policy, scan this QR code. It's going to take you to the U.S. Department of Human Services, their social media policy online. Great starting resource that you can model your own after that. And when you're thinking about the policies or the procedures of who's going to do this, who's going to create the post, who's going to approve it, who's going to monitor it, go through this checklist. It is a great fail-safe to create a standard process to know that you've got a policy in place, and it will help establish your process, create trust in your brand, and as well as improve your overall council's persona online. Another thing that people don't understand is your social media disclaimer. You want to make sure that you leverage the about section on your social media platforms. That's a great way to, you can take a screenshot of this. This is a great boilerplate to identify, the expressions made on this page are yada, yada, yada. We reserve the right, etc. Again, we wanted to give you at least some point of reference if you do not have one. And it's not a bad idea to put a link on your website for your full social media disclaimer. And I know we're going to wrap up here for my part of the section. This is the part that's super, super important right here. Listen to what I'm about to tell you. It is no longer about how many followers you have. It is about whether or not you are interesting. And do you have content that is of interest to me? Because it's what we found with platforms is it's all about one piece of content could go to 1.5 million people or 150 people. But the only way for you to play the game is to create that content. Truly, the creative is your variable of success, and the algorithms are designed to push the content to the people who have already demonstrated with likes and comments and shares that they love that comment. They love that content. Define your measurables. Is it worth it? You really need to understand what are your metrics, whether it's likes or clicks or shares, so that you understand what your outcomes if you're really being successful. And align those with your council goals, whether it's a policy to influence or public engagement. Define it and then measure it. Then you will know if you are being successful in your efforts. So this is kind of the final thoughts. I know we've kind of, gone through here. I've only been talking for like 3.5 hours, but maybe you've had some ideas. What can you take away from today that you can implement first? Is it just familiarity with platforms? Is it how to think strategically? Or is it how to respond to negative content? So if we've got some questions, or we can pivot to our other speaker and let them, work with some content. I'm so thankful for the opportunity to share with everyone, and I look forward to the rest of the session.
Thanks, Michael. Uh, as we get people want to know, can they have copies of your PowerPoint? And not, it's not a PowerPoint, your presentation. So
Absolutely, of course.
we can make that available to you all, and lots of great content. You can, Frank, I think you can go ahead to the ITAC Operations Outlook. I just wanted to set the stage real quick. Michael talked about so many great points. Next slide, please. I think, and these aren't additional considerations. I don't know. It's another word. It's like important considerations. Really about, he mentioned knowing who you are trying to reach and why. Super important. And then matching that with that platform that will get you that maximum exposure to who you're trying to reach. So really that being very thoughtful, all great tips. Now, I just want you all, he mentioned all of this, but this is to highlight operationally for you all as DD Council staff and members. Um, he's not kidding when he was saying this daily thing, it's a thing. So if you're going to use Facebook, it kind of, these are the industry standards about once a day. You're using Instagram a couple times a day. If you're using X, up to 5 times a day. YouTube, put a video up a week. If you're using LinkedIn for those professional networking connections, sharing your policies, your reports, your impacts, you're looking at a maximum daily. So, these tasks are really assigned. I mean, I can't, I think we all get kind of captured by all of our social media. We like to say we're all hooked up in social media. And, but there is a workload and labor hours attached to it. And so, when you have to look and monitor, Michael's right. If you're going to use a Facebook platform and you're inviting people to comment, well, you can't just ignore them. You kind of want to stay ahead of it, and make sure somebody's monitoring some things. And there's weekly and monthly tasks that you can implement. I'm no way suggesting that you don't use social media. It is so viable for putting yourselves out there. And Michael, I love, if you don't lead this narrative, someone else is just going to lead it for you. And so you want to be that. We've done a lot of work over the years on thought leaders, and that councils are really a great place for thought leadership. Take advantage of it. Share your successes. I know you've had partners along the way, but if it wasn't for the council making the investments, things would not change. So there's that. Next slide, please. And then, of course, I'm not going to let you guys go without talking a little bit more about evaluation of your social media efforts. And I know that we love to say we had 100,000 people, we reached through this. And, we talk about this all the time in your federal reporting. The feds are like, great. And what did that lead to? And so things like, if you can even add something to your registration form, did you learn about this event through social media? That will demonstrate that your efforts in outreach, in trying to reach people not known to you, are actually working. And so just consider using some very specific, not a lot, because surveys need to be short, but some data collection questions that will support the outcomes you're seeing, that's directly tied to your social media efforts. Because I think, we want to prove that these strategies are working and they're having an impact, and along with other things. So Jolene Sharp, Jolene is a fabulous resource to our network. And over the years, Tennessee was probably one of the first two councils who actually made the efforts to implement a social media policy for members and staff. So we're really happy that Jolene's here to talk about the Tennessee Council's efforts and just your structure. So Jolene?
Thank you, Cheryl, and thank you, Michael. That was great content. Really enjoyed a good refresher on some of the basics of social media. This is going to be a little bit of a shift because the content that I'm going to talk about now is going to focus on how we deal with policies related to how staff and how governor-appointed council members engage personally in social media, and that kind of blurry line between professional and personal use, and how do you navigate that? And I don't think it's any secret that we live in especially divided times. And these issues can start to feel pretty fraught. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how we have navigated that in Tennessee. I will say on the front end that we do also have documented internal policies around some of what Michael was talking about related to how we monitor and how we administer our social media accounts. So for example, when do we remove comments? And we have to be very careful about that because we are a government agency. And so we have policies around that too that are documented and that we follow pretty carefully. For example, we always screenshot comments before we delete them so that we have documentation of why they were removed, things like that. So I'm happy to talk to folks more about some of that if you're more interested in some of that internal moderation policy. But this presentation will talk a little bit more about how we implement policy to guide how our members and staff engage in social media. We can move to the next slide. This is our disclaimers. We always have this in our template. We can go ahead and forward. You all are probably very familiar with this slide. So this is just a quick overview of what I'll cover. I'll talk a little bit just generally about why we implemented policies. I'll give you an overview of each of the policies that we have, one for members and then one for staff. And then I'll talk a little bit about how we've actually implemented that through some real world scenarios that we've dealt with. And I'll make sure we have some time for questions at the end so we can move forward. So we can keep going. One more slide. Thank you. So why have a social media policy? I don't think that it will come as any surprise to this group that social media really can blur personal and professional identities. The public generally isn't going to make a distinction between whether someone was speaking in a professional and official capacity or whether they were speaking personally. The public does not distinguish often between those things. We know that the fact that social media is constantly available encourages instant response. So what that means is people are responding in real time. They're not necessarily stopping and really thinking something through before they formulate a post. When they're responding personally to unfolding events or content that they're responding to in real time. And that's for better and worse, right? Sometimes that's the intent, that we get fresh and immediate responses. We get to see real-time reactions to content, but it also means that we're not always seeing people's best responses. We're seeing their first responses. And that can introduce some risks. And we know too that social media algorithms tend to reward divisive content that really generates a strong emotional response. So those factors make it critically important to set very clear expectations around how appointed members and how staff engage publicly as representatives of the agency. And clear guidance ultimately really helps people feel comfortable engaging. It kind of gives them, they know where the guardrails are. And ultimately, it encourages that positive engagement. It gives them the confidence to participate. And ultimately, the goal is to make social media a strength rather than a liability. Okay, we can advance slides. Thanks. So there are two roles that we have separate policies for. We have a policy, a public communications policy for our members that are governor appointed. our citizen members, that is introduced at their orientation, and then they acknowledge it annually. So they sign an acknowledgement for our policies annually. And then staff actually have a state of Tennessee employee policy that we also are required to acknowledge annually. So those are separate policies, and I'm going to go over each of them separately. But there is one common thread across both policies. So on the next slide, I'll talk a little bit about what that is. And that is the importance of political neutrality. And that's why we're talking about what this looks like in divisive times, right? Because our agency's ability to effectively engage with policymakers on all sides of the aisle, all across the political spectrum, depends on our nonpartisan identity. That approach is baked into our DNA. It's how we operate. And that means that it's heavily embedded in the onboarding that we do for staff and orientation for appointed members. So this identity for our agency as being politically neutral is a core foundation to the more specific policies that we are going to then layer on top of that. When our members and our staff understand that this is core to our identity as an agency and how we operate, then the specific policies as they relate to communications and public policy build off of that. All right, so I'm going to go through, first of all, the policy that we use for our governor-appointed citizen members. We can go to the next slide. So the social media and online communications policy that we have is actually embedded within the larger public communications policy. So it's related to how do you engage publicly as a representative of the Council on Developmental Disabilities. And right at the beginning of this policy, before we get into any specifics, we lay out that the DD Act principles, the Developmental Disabilities Act principles, and our member code of conduct are the guiding documents for all interactions as a member. So again, we're building foundations, right? We have the foundation of who we are as an agency, the importance of our political neutrality. Then we have the layers of the DD Act principles, our member code of conduct as guiding principles and documents, and then we get into the specifics of our social media policy. We can go to the next slide. So the policy related to social media specifically encourages the use. We didn't want to start with here's what not to do, here's all the bad things. We really wanted to frame it positively as your role as a governor appointed council member helps us expand access to information, get the resources that we're working so hard to produce out there to your communities, to the people out there in your networks. Your role as a member is that you're connected to the disability community in your local community, and you get to be a resource to help expand who we're reaching. So we really start by encouraging our members to use their personal social networking and online platform accounts to share our information, to share the resources that we're promoting to help us get beyond our immediate network into their networks and communities. It's the whole policy. Engaging that when they're speaking personally and not officially speaking on behalf of the council. So that disclaimer can look up front can help create a little bit of a buffer. Okay, we can move to the next slide. So our policy states explicitly that our that if we see some from council events, things like that, right? Because that's what helps bring their personal networks to our content. So trying to kind of give them some coaching on how to help terms of our council members' tenure, those relationships can get pretty close. It can, you know, we get interested in each other's personal lives. We can really develop close and that's important just to create those healthy boundaries. Usually our staff do not friend council members, but council members do friend our staff, and we accept those. That's if you're interested in a little more detail. Now I'm going to touch on the policy for staff. So we can go to that next slide. So the staff policy the staff policy, the employee policy for the state references the First Amendment protection. So it's saying, hey, we understand that your right to free speech is protected, but it also says that it has to be clear that the employee is not speaking officially or on behalf of the agency or the state. And again, we've talked about how that can get murky. So we'll go to the next slide and I'll read a quote from the policy that I think really touches on that. We can go to the next slide. Oh, I think that went backwards. There, oh, one back. There we go. We got there. So this quote I think is worth reading. It said, and this is directly from the employee policy, it says state employees must be cognizant that they still represent the state in their private personal settings. The lines between public and private, personal and professional are blurred in online social networks, and content or information an employee creates, posts, or shares on their personal account may reflect on the state. Therefore, employees must be aware of their association with the state and be thoughtful of how they present themselves online. And I will say that a little bit further down in the policy, it also states explicitly that accounts that list the state of Tennessee as an employer are held to a higher standard. So it's that link, right? That even when you're operating and speaking personally, if you are a state employee and you're associated with the state, your behavior will reflect on the state. And, you know, therefore on our council as an agent, as a state agency. Okay, we can move forward. So the policy also references that the state's workplace policies, so related to discrimination and harassment, violence in the workplace, abusive conduct, and code of conduct policies are all still relevant and apply to online behavior. So that's important to note because it ties that behavior not just to what's happening at the workplace, but also potentially to how somebody is engaging online and even after hours outside of work. If there's behavior that's happening online that's related to workplace relationships that crosses the line into violations of these policies, then the consequences, the processes that are outlined and how that's dealt with will apply even for social media behavior. So that's stated explicitly in the staff position. in the staff policy. It also talks about, of course, things like protection of confidential information, trademark copyright laws, logo infringement, things like that. Basically reminding people that you can't break the law online any more than you can in any other environment. And then it does actually explicitly prohibit non-job related personal use of social media during work hours on state equipment. So that's kind of the gist of that policy. There is one quote related to the discriminatory kind of policies. It said the state policy, the employee policy says inappropriate postings that may include discriminatory remarks, harassment, and threats of violence, or similar inappropriate or unlawful content will not be tolerated and may be subject to investigation by, you know, the Department of HR or other bodies. So I think it's just worth noting that having those workplace policies and explicitly tying them to online behavior is very helpful for maintaining that expectation that what you're doing in off hours online is not removed from the expectations about how you engage professionally. Okay, so we can go to the next slide. So the bottom line here really is that both council members and staff should be prepared for intervention if social media conduct introduces risks for the agency. And that goes back to our identity as a neutral party that is trusted across the political spectrum to be a fair, wise partner in policy work. A neutral position is central to our role. We bring people together across differences to work toward common values and goals. And that's the unique strength of councils. That's who we are. It's what we do. So this just isn't about something theoretical. It's really about how we're effective in the work that we do. We actively teach staff and our members, and even, you know, through our trainings like Partners in Policymaking, we're training people to see and treat with respect the humans involved in even the most challenging interactions, and that includes online. After all, we have a very diverse body of members and people that we work with, right? So any group we're talking about is potentially represented within that diverse body right here in our own council community. We have people from all political views. We have all people from all socioeconomic and racial backgrounds, all life experiences, all types of disabilities. So remembering the humans involved is core to how we teach our network to engage. And that matters online just like it does in any other setting. So that's really the foundation of those policies and of how we teach our network to engage on social media. All right, we can go forward. So what does this look like in practice, right? It's all fine to talk about it in theory. You can have all the policies in the world, but how do you actually apply that? So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the real world application, and I'm going to start with some positives of how that network engagement can really be such a strength of social media. So we can go to the next slide. This is a sampling of just a few of the posts that we created as part of our Medicaid storytelling campaign. I know a lot of us have been engaging in some of this Medicaid storytelling as funding and structural changes to Medicaid have come up in Congress. And this is just a sampling of a few of those. I see that Dirk is commenting. Dirk Strider, our communications coordinator, is here and did phenomenal work to create these posts. He spent a lot of time actually interviewing pretty much everybody that we featured and writing up their stories and creating these graphics. And the great thing about it is the folks that we are featuring then bring their personal networks to the outreach, right? So people they know get excited to see their stories featured and they get shared. And these posts have performed really, really well because it's personal and it's human. And that network reaches so far beyond the people that are directly engaged with us and directly connected to us. It reaches people who might otherwise have never even known who we were. So that's the power of the networking aspects of social media when it's being used really positively. We can go one more, and I've got one more example of that. So every year, our council produces an issue of our Breaking Ground magazine that's the arts issue, and it's specifically focused on featuring all kinds of art by people with disabilities in Tennessee. And our call for that art, for those art submissions, tends to get shared very widely. And what that means is through those networking opportunities, through people leveraging that network that's built into social media, the whole way it operates, we end up really getting to feature a whole wide, diverse array of art in our magazine, and people that might not, again, it's people that might not have ever been directly connected with us or known about us before, get a chance to have their art featured and to get promoted in our publication. This most recent issue that came out in the spring, we got to feature everything from fiber arts and knitting and clay pottery to paintings and photography, poetry, short stories. We've even featured a rap before with the QR code. It was so cool. It was one of my favorite pieces. So that's where the power of networking is so beneficial, because we can reach so far beyond people that we just know immediately, who are a direct connection, and really get to a diverse community of people and help share their work and help promote their work as artists in Tennessee. All right, so I know really the sticky part is coming up, which is what happens when things go wrong. How do we apply this policy in the tougher scenarios? So I've got 4 situations here that we have navigated over the past few years. And I'll describe a little bit about how we handled each one of these. So the first one was a situation where a council member got involved in a very vitriolic debate publicly on Facebook with another member of our network. They were both partners in policymaking graduates from the same class, but with very different political views and perspectives. And it got real ugly. And the way that we decided to respond to this is the way that we handle a lot of these kinds of situations, which is it was a one-on-one outreach and a conversation, because it's an opportunity for coaching and learning, right? So our executive director at the time was Wanda Willis. Many of you know her, a beacon in our field, but she called this member directly and just had a conversation and said, look, this can't go on. This can't be how we engage as members of the council publicly. It does not reflect well on our agency, and it's creating problems for us. And the member was actually took it very well. It was Wanda, so those of you who know her know she was very graceful and understanding in the way she approached it. It was empathetic, and the member took it well. And I think it was a growth opportunity. And they did engage differently on Facebook after that. So the crisis simmered down, and we were able to move forward. So another story, another example is that we had a council member who was sharing a lot of misinformation during COVID. And I'm sure plenty of you navigated similar situations. And it was really directly contradicting public health information that we were helping to produce and disseminate as part of our response to a public health crisis. And many of you probably were using some of those COVID grant funds to do similar work. And this situation we handled a little differently, because this council member was at the very end of their term. And so we opted to just let it go for the time being, but the internal conversation was around a shared understanding that had this member not been about to roll off, this would have been disqualifying for a recommendation for reappointment. So it would have weighed in terms of our decision on whether we wanted to retain them for a second term, had that been an option. But in this case, it was the end, and we kind of let it go. But it would have weighed in that decision. And kind of related, the governor's office contacted us at one point about a council member that they were considering for another role in the administration, not an employee role, but another representative role, and talked to us some about this member. And, we gave pretty positive recommendations. But the governor's office then reviewed that person's social media feed, and it ended up that that social media feed on its own disqualified that person from consideration. And it wasn't because they were from different political parties or had different partisan views. It was because of the tone of the content. So I think that's a helpful example to remind members of the real world consequences of what you say online and how that can affect other opportunities. Being a governor appointed council member can open other doors to new opportunities, other opportunities to serve, other leadership roles, and how members are engaging online can have a real impact on those opportunities. So that's just an interesting lesson to kind of file away and that we will talk to members about sometimes. And then this is the most recent example. I'll wrap up here in just a minute, but the final example is that a very heated debate broke out last year on Facebook within our Partners in Policymaking network over a bill that was being introduced in the Tennessee State Legislature that was going to allow an exception that would allow for new congregate living facilities for people with disabilities. And this was a very hot topic for quite a while within the Partners Network, because we had opposite viewpoints within that network about whether or not this was a good thing, whether or not it needed to be opposed, how to oppose it. And as happens on social media, it got very, very personal. And interestingly, the timing of this was that it was happening just as we were getting ready to hold an in-person Partners in Policymaking alumni reunion, the first one that we'd had in several years. We had not had them during COVID. It was much anticipated. We were gathering our alumni network in person for a weekend reunion for the first time in several years. And this was kind of going on just leading into that. And so our staff spent a fair bit of time preparing for how do we navigate that? What happens if this comes up, as we're gathered in person? And we really spent a lot of time preparing for how to coach and guide our partners, alumni, through having constructive conversations when you disagree. What does that look like? How do we regulate ourselves when this may be very triggering? You may have very deeply personal reasons for caring and having the view that you do. And how do you regulate yourself in these conversations? How do you communicate with respect and hear perspectives that you may very deeply disagree with? So we did a lot of prep around that, about how we were going to frame all of this, how we were going to coach folks through it. But the interesting thing about it is that once people got in the room in person, it really wasn't a problem. In fact, I have a distinct memory of standing at the front of the room, presenting, and it was still on the fairly early in the weekend. It was introductory type content, and looking at the back of the room and seeing two of the Partners alumni that had been engaged in some of the most vitriolic debate coming together and sitting at the table and putting their heads together and having a conversation that was clearly, respectful and friendly. And by the time they had had a chance to talk for a little while, they had worked through it and they came out okay. So I think it's an interesting illustration of how sometimes the way to foster this is to remind people to look each other in the eye and remember the human connection. And sometimes being in person together is the best way to do that. So those are kind of the real world examples. We can go to the next slide, and I'm about to wrap up here, getting close to the end. I wanted to mention this briefly. Social media can be hugely positive. It can also be downright toxic. And over the last few years, we have shifted a little bit in how we have handled what we call social listening. We used to do a lot of monitoring of social media posting in different networks, on our feeds, and really paying a lot of attention to the conversations that were happening, not necessarily directly on our pages, but within the networks, right? What are people with disabilities talking about? How are they engaging? What topics are they interested in, passionate about? And we did find value in that, but we found that over time, it was taking a toll on staff. Some of those conversations were pretty toxic, and they could start to feel very, very heavy. And so we have over the past year or so shifted a little bit to leaning away from all of that social listening and really monitoring broader conversations, and have encouraged staff to prioritize their mental health over social media engagement, which may sound a little counterintuitive. We still produce social media content for our account, so we're sharing lots of information, and we of course monitor our accounts for comments and do the moderation that needs to happen as part of that. But we do a lot less of the broader engagement because we have found that it actually benefits our staff's well-being. So that may be something you want to talk about internally at your own agencies. How much do we engage? What's healthy? Where's the balance? In a time when social media content can sometimes start to feel pretty overwhelming and unhealthy. And frankly, we encourage staff sometimes to just go outside and look at some trees and be offline for a while. So finding that balance has been important for us internally. So this page just gives direct links to both our council member and our staff policies. And I've listed my information here because I would love to talk to any of you anytime you're interested in talking about these policies or about other communications and social media work that you're doing. I do not promise to have all the answers. I am in it with you, but I'm happy to brainstorm it and chat anytime. So my personal direct contact information is there on that slide. Please reach out anytime. And then I'm going to stop there. And I think we have a few minutes for questions if there are any. I have not been monitoring the chat, so I'm not sure if there have been questions in the chat.
We definitely have time for questions. If you have any questions, please feel free to either put them in the chat or raise your hand, because we have plenty of time to have a little conversation too about social media, what works for you, what doesn't. So anybody who has any thoughts, any questions, anything they want to share, now's your time. And while you're doing that, I'm also going to launch the poll, and if you wouldn't mind completing that too, it'd be awesome. Lanny.
Hi, this is Lanny. I was just wondering if anybody has a favorite social media manager, like Hootsuite or other ones. I know we looked into it a couple years ago, but I don't know if there's any new ones out there or if people are using any of them and have one that they like.
I think Michael could probably advise on some of that. I will say we used Hootsuite for quite a while. And then we ended up dropping it because we found that since we are only using Facebook and LinkedIn currently, we had dropped X, that we were able to manage it pretty effectively through the in-platform mechanisms, the scheduling tools. Those tools have gotten a lot better, I think, recently, over the past couple of years, and we found that that we weren't really getting our money's worth out of Hootsuite. So we opted to just use the in-platform scheduling and management tools.
Okay, good to know. Yeah, I know. I saw one of the first ones was talking about Facebook and X and Instagram and some other ones, and I was like, oh, that's a lot. So I was wondering if other people were doing social media managers, but some people are just doing one or two. It sounds like two platforms. Okay.
Well, and just to give you a little more feedback, our agency manages about 100 different social media channels and platforms for nonprofit agencies. And due to that volume, we do have to use the scheduling tools because they're on multiple platforms. We left Hootsuite many, many years ago. It just wasn't it couldn't handle the volume that we were doing as an agency. And we needed the ability to jump between profiles. We went to Sprout Social about 5 years ago, or 5 years ago we were at Sprout. We tried that, we liked that, but we found a new tool called MetroCool about 2 years ago, and we really liked MetroCool quite a bit. We liked the interface, we liked the reporting capabilities. But to Jolene's point, if you only have two platforms, then maybe natively on that platform, as she described, the scheduling tools there have gotten way better than just even 3 years ago. Significant changes. So that would be just a couple of other platforms out there that we've used and are currently trying.
I see Lisa's question in the chat about engagement with elected officials, and I will say that our policy is written to broadly apply to engagement with anyone, including public officials. And we do, our broader communications policy talks about how you present yourself in conversations with elected officials and public, policymakers of any kind, and sets some expectations for what that looks like. We do not ask them to limit interactions or anything like that. It's more about teaching the principles of how you engage. I will say, I see the comment about partners in policymaking. We do not host a partners group or anything like that officially on Facebook for this reason, because we don't necessarily want to take on ownership of moderating what that looks like for such a large network permanently. But we do, when it is council members specifically who are partners in policymaking graduates, which many of them are, then there's an additional layer of intervention that we're willing to bring to and in general, the Partners in Policymaking reunion was a unique situation because we were bringing people together in person at a time when they were also having these online debates. So it added a layer of, now we are responsible for how they engage in this environment where we're hosting the event. So we don't necessarily take ownership of how partners alumni engage online once they graduate. We're not trying to give them policies to guide that after the fact. But often there's overlap with council membership and partners grads, and it does, of course, spill over into in-person gatherings.
Any other questions, or anybody want to share how they're currently addressing social media monitoring or negative content? Oh, Lisa in Pennsylvania says that they shared, no, actually it just left me. Oh, there we go. They offered training on how to boost, share, promote on different platforms for their grantees and council members, but felt like it was only moderately successful. Katie?
I just wanted to say I appreciated all of the input from both presenters, and I really liked Cheryl's comment too of, so what? Because I know a lot of us council staff members, we spend a lot of time making, like Jolene was talking about, that campaign telling the Medicaid story. We put a lot of time in that, and it's one thing to say, we had 672 views of that, but what was the impact? If we had self-advocates going to the legislature because they have more information. And I just think it's really important to remember to tie all of those together and to think of your so what, because then it just adds value to all the time we're spending on all of these social media concerns. So I wanted to thank both presenters.
Yeah, and I'll say we started out using more metrics in our state plan, reporting that were focused on number of followers and how many people we were reaching. And over time, we have shifted more towards engagement metrics and have found those to be a little more meaningful. So I don't know if that's helpful at all to anyone, but that we have found that those to be the more meaningful metrics in terms of showing that people are actually finding value in the content and not just looking at it as they're scrolling.
Well, this has been a really great, very informative session. I just want to thank you, Michael and Jolene. You've offered some really great information that's been very helpful to councils. And if anyone has any additional questions or wants to reach out to either Michael or Jolene, you can definitely get in touch with Cheryl and I, and we can get you in touch with them.